whole plethora of graffiti inks and paints out there, and almost all of them are great to use in either a graffiti mop, chisel tip marker, a metalhead, or something like that. But with there being so many of them out there, and for the most part with them being mostly similarly priced, how do you know which ones are going to be best for your sort of graffiti purposes? Well, that is exactly what I'm here to help you out with today. Whether you're a veteran of the graffiti game or just starting out, I'm going to be telling you my top 10 best inks and paints that I have ever used. And not only that, I'm going to be telling you guys what each of them is best to use it for and how I use each of them. So that's where the more specific knowledge might come in for those veterans out there. And you'll want to stick around for the whole list because there are multiple ones on this list, especially the top 5 that will definitely surprise you, but I hope I can justify them, so hear me out. Let's get right into it. And to start off, although I'm not going to mention every paint formula and ink formula I've ever used, because we'd literally be here all day, I do want to throw in a few honorable mentions, mostly because I feel that they're good enough that I should say something about them. And our first honorable mention here is the Grog Buff Proof ink. A couple of years ago, we did a really harsh buff test with this Grog Buff Proof ink, and a lot of people got a little bit peeved about that because we did a buff on basically a finished surface and the stuff came off fairly easily. A lot of people said nothing would have stayed on that surface. Subsequently though, we did buff some other stuff from that surface which lasted better than the buff proof ink. But I don't want people to get the wrong idea. This is a very solid ink to use. I found it's particularly resistant to the UV rays a little more than some other inks. And the next honorable mention here, we've got the Dang ink. It only came out last year and I was actually super impressed with it when Bombing Science sent me over some to test out. We did a full tagging test and a buff test on it. You can see that video in the corner or in the description below. And again, very good ink, especially for being like a more budget conscious ink. It's very, very high quality and it provides great value. Actually, I found it's just not a standout ink, so it's not in the top 10. The third honorable mention here is the On the Run Soul Tip 901 paint. This is your standard glossy graffiti paint to be used in a graffiti mop. It works, it's not too expensive, it doesn't have permanence the same way some other formulae do though. And the last honorable mention here, I promise we're moving on after that, is Speed White Correction Pen Fluid by On the Run. Now this stuff is great, it's really cool. It's a solvent based correction pen fluid, which is really rare to find nowadays because of, you know, regulations and stuff. But the problem is I haven't found a single thing you can put this in where it doesn't just dry up in a fairly short amount of time. Full seal metal tip markers, actual correction pens, it dries up in everything. And just in case you're wondering, yes, the remainder, the little bit here, is dried up in this bottle. I don't know what to say about it. The seal is in the cap and everything. It just gonna dry up. I don't know what to tell you. So I would recommend using this, but in combination with another paint or ink to give it that extra presence and that opacity boost that it needs. That's what this stuff is great for. But that's enough of that. We're not playing around anymore, okay? We've got the real housewives of top 10. We've got the real top 10 inks and paints that I have ever used here. Obviously, this list is going to be fairly subjective because we're sort of comparing apples and oranges, especially with the paints versus the inks. And, you know, they're all different, but a lot of thought did go into the order that I put these in, and I'm hoping I can justify it for you. And number 10, we're already starting off with a bit of a surprise here, and that is the Krink paint formula. Yep, you heard me. The paint formula that comes in these Krink K60s as well as the Krink K66s. I'll explain why. Hear me out. This paint formula is on the thicker side, which personally I like, but really the thing that everyone should like about it is just the vibrancy of the paint colors. All the colors I've ever gotten of Krink, which to be honest isn't that many. I don't like to spend my money on Krink. They've all been very vibrant and they're nice true colors. But the main reason this paint formula is on there is because the Krink Silver in particular, the silver is on a whole nother level. At least everyone can agree with me on that. Come on guys, if you do or if you don't, leave a comment, let me know. We'll see where everyone's at on that. Number 9, we've got the OTR 902 marker paint. Not to be confused with the 901. The 902 is for your bullet tip, chisel tip, etc. markers. And to be honest, it's just a good all-around paint. It just works well. It tends to flow really well through the nice bullet tip markers. And there's not much more to say about it than that. And number 8 on this list is really sending a message to the last one, the 902 marker paint. It is the Grog Extra Flow paint. It's essentially the Grog version of the marker paint. You would put this stuff, the Extra Flow paint, in chisel tip markers or bullet tip markers. Personally, I use this stuff religiously in my Grog cutters. I actually buy this teal color quite a bit, and that's just because the colors of this Extra Flow paint are just vibrant. Don't get me wrong, they're both good inks. I found both of these to be very weatherproof, but not permanent. Not buff proof in any capacity for either of them there. Both the 902 marker paint and the Grog Extra Flow paint here that are made for chisel tip markers are more expensive than the paint in their brands that comes for mobs. And I'm gonna tell you why that is. With paints, you have a non-soluble pigmentation. That's what makes it opaque. That's what you see sitting at the bottom of a bottle if it's unshaken. Those little bits of insoluble pigmentation actually have to be machined. So with your bullet tip or chisel tip nibs that are much denser, there has to be more machining done to the pigmentation to make the little bits small enough to travel through those denser nibs as compared to the less dense mop nibs. So the reason these marker paints are a little more expensive is just because the extra machining required is what you need to have it flow through the denser chisel tip nibs. The markup for the extra machining is probably more than the actual extra machining cost, but hey, that's another story. Number 7 is sort of the last normal or standard graffiti mop that I'm gonna discuss actually here, and it's actually 2. The Grog Rough Stuff paint that comes in these Grog metal heads, as well as the Grog Full Metal paint. Now both of these are very thick paints, especially the Rough Stuff paint's designed to be much thicker. I personally love that, as well as the color selection of the Rough Stuff paint. With the exception of the metallic colors like this gold, the Grog Full Metal paint's actually a very thick paint as well. It still flows through a mop though, whereas this Rough Stuff paint doesn't. You'll just want to use it in a metal head. And the Full Metal paint I've relied on for a long time. It's about the best price you'll find for a well-known graffiti brand paint. It works really nicely. I found it to be super permanent. The only drawback, I haven't found anything that this stuff mixes with particularly well. It's one of those standalone things you don't want to combine with anything in my experience. And number 6 on this list of formulae has to be the Molotov Liquid Chrome. I don't usually go for the metallics all that much, but this really is a true mirror-like silver. It's one of the most mirror-like silvers you can get in graffiti. So although I can't really afford to pay liquid chrome prices all that often, it's certainly a fun way to change it up if you're into that sort of thing. Hell, you can even do what Wetman did in his review of the liquid chrome, throw it in a mop and just go to town. Now number 5 on this list is really where it's gonna start to get weird. I cannot emphasize that enough. Like if you were to take a stab at it and guess 5 that are gonna be on the top 5, you might guess 1 on this list. Seriously guys, we are going for a ride in this top 5 and I think you guys are going to be super surprised at almost all of these choices. And number 5 is one that I fell in love with maybe 10 or 12 years ago, maybe even longer, and it is of course the block by block ink. Now this stuff is a little hard to find nowadays. Of course, you gotta message the guy on Instagram apparently. Although I'm sure some colors are better than others, I did a whole video testing out every single paint and ink formula and seeing how long it lasts in all weather conditions. And you're gonna wanna check that video out in the corner or the description to see how many years the white block by block ink lasted in all weather during that test. And number 4 on this list is only getting weirder, guys, and that is because it is Witch's Brew ink. Sadly, this stuff's no longer being made. It's just this juicy, thick black ink. It feels great to write with. Unfortunately, it's actually super easy to remove, even for a black ink. And like I said, it's no longer being manufactured anymore, but along my quest searching for information about this ink, I found out quite a bit about the ink and how it's made. If you want to check that out, you can check the video in the corner in the description, of course. Now, number 3 is actually going to be the most controversial one on this list, I would think, even more than the Krink, yes. And that is because get ready. It is the dang paint formula here. I know. Let me explain, guys. Come on, give it a chance. When we tested this out, the colors were vibrant and the drips, the drips were actually insane. This is one of the drippiest paint formulae I have ever actually seen. And you know what? When we did an exclusive buff test of the dang paint over on our Patreon page, where you can sign up, it's $3 a month if you want to see exclusive tutorials and buff tests, things like that. This was actually harder to remove on a finished surface than a lot of inks or even. Like I said, if you want to check the Patreon out, it's $3 a month. That's like the price of a coffee for access for the whole month, where you can see the exclusive buff tests, tutorials, things like that. There's one new video a month that comes out there all the time, and it helps to support the channel and make more videos here on YouTube for everyone. But as much as this paint is supposed to be more of like a budget paint, it performs like a top-notch paint in my experience. I would love to hear where everyone else is with this paint in the comments now, especially since it's been out for quite a while. I remember right when it came out, a lot of people said they were using it and trying it out, so I'd love to see where everyone landed with that. Now, number 2 is one that I've actually heard mixed opinions on. I'll say that right off the bat, and it is, of course, Incredible Ink by On The Run. Now, this is actually my sort of go-to ink. I don't use inks all that often, but it's my go-to ink specifically in the red too, for a reason. I just find this mixes well with just about anything. I mixed it with some fun stuff like the Speed White correction pen fluid, and even mixed it with Krink Silver, believe it or not. And the results of that were totally off the chain. If you want to check it out, it's priced like a premium ink, but it also performs like a premium ink. And that was true in our buff test that we did of it as well. So it's something to keep in mind, maybe to try out if you're looking for an ink. And now that we're at number 1, I just want to remind everyone that we're sort of comparing apples and oranges here, right? So everyone's top 5 list would look different than mine, or top 10 list. If you want to share your top 5 list here, leave it in the comments. I will read it. I will give it a heart. I know there's tons of great ones that you guys have out there too. And the more you share, the more graffiti knowledge we all have about the different formulae available to us. But with that being said, the number 1 best ink or paint that I have ever used here is the OTR 988 ball pen fluid. So yeah, it's not exactly an ink or paint, it is an ink concentrate. And the truth is, this stuff is just too versatile for it not to be on this list. You can use it even in like a metalhead and it's absolutely bonkers. It takes forever to dry actually if you mix it with a lot of stuff, but trying to clean it up wet is just a nightmare in itself. The bottle recommends you only do, I think, up to, it says 5 to 20% you're gonna want to mix it with, not more than 1/2/4 or 1/5 of whatever you're combining it with, but I've used it up to about 40 or 50%, and the results can be pretty awesome. But like I said, these are just my top 10 here that I have used. If you guys want to share yours in the comments, feel free. I know there's tons of great inks and paints I wasn't able to talk about here today, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on them. If you did want to see the monstrosity of a formula we created, it's one of the most permanent things I've ever seen in my life that we created by doing a bit of DIY with this ball pen fluid. You're gonna want to check out the video on my left here. You can check that video right now. It's one of the most permanent things you can make DIY style. I hope to see you over there soon. Until then, peace.